of Handu T, an introduction of the words of James Yaki Stiles. Is it Stiles or Siles? Sales, I think so. War for the Cities, Free the RNA 12 prisoners of war, the transforming of colonial and criminal mentality, scenes from the Battle of Algiers, raids of Chicago public housing, from one generation to the next, Martin Luther King Jr.'s an extremist on extremism, capitalism and imperialism, Malcolm X, model of personal transformation, reflections of Victor Surge, what everyone should know about state repression. Stop, you must read this first. And in Meditations from Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, Part 1, by the way of introduction concerning violence and development of new people. Part 3, the deconstruction of race. And Part 4, on the restoration of nationhood and constitution of revolutionary nationalism. Oh my God! Consciousness and socialist humanist objectives. Wow, my first one. I got my first strike today, right now, just now. Isn't that awesome? That is awesome, isn't it? All right, let me see. Let's go. Let's read this a little bit so we have some time here. Let's read this a little bit. We'll do the preface. Preface. Was trying to make sense of the world as a baby nationalist when I met Yaki. He helped me digest Marx and Lenin, fed me Mao and Cabral, and shook me out of the doldrum of narrow cultural nationalism. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. My parents came from the hard-working West Virginia hills and raised me with a decent moral compass and an eye towards college education. As I learned more of what it meant to be a black man in America, my outrage at justice and oppression grew. I remember the murders of Fred Hampton and the terror in my mother's eye and voice when I expressed this outrage and a desire to become active in the struggle for liberation. I was too young to be a Black Panther, but I was inspired by their examples. I love to read, and I always found nonfiction and political science compelling, kind of like me. Yeah. It was in this context that I met Yaki. His writing intrigued me, and I was drawn to his analysis. Naturally, I jumped at the chance of meeting him. I traveled more than 100 miles to Dixon, Illinois, the hometown of Ronald Reagan, to visit with him at the state prison. The visiting room was unusually less than half full, but on some weekend or holidays, our visits would be cut short due to overcrowding mostly. We could sit for hours and talk about talk about any and everything. The first time we sat down together, we had to feel each other out, having only corresponded up to that point. He was clean cut, was neatly trimmed mustache. He kept his hair cut short, but not bald. He had an easy smile and a knowing demeanor, often seeming amused when we discussed the movement or different comrades. He would ask probing questions about different aspects of the work, and when he wasn't satisfied with an answer, he was sure to ask more detailed questions. If he thought an answer was totally useless, he would simply say, "Why not?" I hated leaving him there, and he jokingly suggests that I take his place. He got a kick out of my surname as I demurred. Just like his writings, Yaki worked very hard on precision. It was very important for him to say exactly what he meant. You could see the mental progress at work, and it was a joy to watch. He also worked very hard to encourage one to think for oneself. In fact, he felt that we should be working with people to help them learn how to think instead of telling them what to think. This difference of methodology was a great source of frustration for him as he watched others attempt to agitate, educate, and organize. This collection is important because Yaki put his prodigious intellect and drive to work on the study of the decadence of enslaved Africans, new Africans, and our current social, economic, and political reality. Because he was a bottom of the pile black person, thank you, Malcolm, he wrote to and for the oppressed masses. How often have no representatives amongst our so-called leaders? He concentrated on developing theory for the voiceless in their struggle against neocolonialism and settler imperialism. Yaki helped me understand this contradiction. The United States of America is a prison house of nations, where nations become like classes, even in the age of Obama, through the analysis begs for thought, though the analysis begged for some fine-tuning. There's more truth and clarity in his journals than can be found in a vast majority of stuff which passes for radical analysis of America today. Introduction. Should we go ahead and do the introduction? How long is it? Let's go ahead and start. What do you think? What do you guys think? Should we go ahead and start the introduction? Yeah? Start the introduction? All right, we'll start the introduction then. Why not? It's a long introduction, but hey, why not? This introduction, I forgot, like this introduction is long. Okay, cool, let's do it. Introduction to the words of James Yaki, I think it's Sales, isn't it? Sales? James Yaki Sales was one of the most important revolutionaries here in the generation following Malcolm X and George Jackson, who were, yes, sweet, thank you, who were worldwide icons like Frantz Fanon, the revolutionary activist and writer of the great book, The Wretched of the Earth. But unlike them, Yaki was an obscured figure and is still, I guess that's it, largely unknown, not by accident, but by his own design. We will explain. The Meditations of Frantz Fanon. I have to get used to reading a book hands because I was doing that whole book with the PDF, so it's a little different. The Meditations on Frantz Fanon. We meet a student of Fanon's guiding us into rediscovering his thought. Fanon was one of the most influential revolutionary theorists of the anti-colonial rebellion, writing for the oppressed. In sharp contrast today, almost all of the books and articles on his work are by the careerist professors that Fanon was wisely distrusted. Those whom Fanon called the willy intellectuals. This book is not. Yaki was one of those rebels from whom Fanon wrote his Wretched of the Earth in the first place. One of those stateless youths who followed Fanon and other liberating voices into taking up the political violence that the white colonialists have tried to reserve for himself. Like the revs that he most considered his teacher, Malcolm X and George Jackson, Yaki grew up poor and found his maturity in prison, the place that Malcolm called, quote, the black man's university, end quote. A child of Chicago's South Side streets, Yaki always just thought of himself as a blood, just another N-word doing a bit, end quote. To borrow the lexicon words of one of the Pontiac State Prison revolts defendants. And it was the prison movement that he found his place in the battlefield. Although he made revolutionary theory his work, his life was rooted in the time of urban guerrillas and the armed struggle, which makes his writing much more difficult to read, but with a warning of danger and commitment that is so often missed in these neo-colonized times between the storms. In the nation, prisons have always been part of a larger community. New African imprisonment is previously normal because of the highly abnormal relationship of colonialism. Yaki always liked to remind people that for hundreds of years, in the 1600s, 1700s, and the first half of the 1800s, white settlers had almost no state prisons or federal prisons for new African people. They didn't need them because they already, oh my gosh, there it goes. I got another, have to appeal another restriction. Hey, welcome in. Because we already lived and labored and died in the permanent prisons of the beautiful white plantations. As Yaki wrote about himself using Malcolm X's words, quote, "In the society to which I was exposed as a black youth here in America, for me to wind up in prison was really just about inevitability. Yeah. The mood of revolt back then was touching everyone's life in sudden unexpected changes. It felt like making our point with dice and much bigger. Two examples out of so many of what we mean. Throughout the 60s, Yaki's hometown was rocked by children's revolts and great citywide school boycotts. Starting in 1963 and in 1964, hundreds of thousands of students emptied the public schools, demanding an end to institutional racism, especially demanding and firing of the clannish school superintendent, Ben Willis. And in October 1963, 225,000 students followed the leadership of New African high school students in the first walkout, spreading to New York City. Some 400,000 children walked out of their schools. But in 1968, the mass boycott were being coordinated by a nationwide youth organization, the Afro-American Students Association, with high school branches, often used the name The New Breed, not only in Chicago and New York, but Cleveland, St. Louis, Detroit, Los Angeles, and other cities. In Chicago, the ASA headquarters were in the Earl Center, the URU Center on the South Side, where nationalist martial arts classes and revolutionary politics were taught. Citywide teenage strategy meetings were held in rooms hung with large posters, not only of Malcolm X, but of Ho Chi Minh and Che Guevara. While hostile police crowded the streets outside, one by one, New African GIs and sailors and airmen were bringing the war back home from other fronts. The distant invasion of military outposts of the worldwide U.S. empire. In Vietnam, the Black Revolutions had brought the U.S. invasion to a standstill in the early 1970s, drafted as cannon fodder for a war that was hardly ours. Quote, using the N-words to kill the G-words, what they use for Asians. It's G-O, you got the rest. Became a bitter GI saying about U.S. government policy back then. Black GIs and Marines were not 10% or even a third, but often 70% or 80% of the line rifle companies that were actually pushed into the jungles to make bloody contact with the Vietnamese fighters. Their nationalist dissatisfaction swept the ranks and reached the brink of mutiny. Units became dysfunctional, or rather, protesting soldiers reorganized the military life around them, into a different function. In camps, new African GIs set up separate areas with their own tent cities where whites were not allowed. Some refused to salute officers except with the Black Power raised fist salute. Soul music played very loudly at all hours as GIs in their own non-regulation afros smoked up and talked politics. Soul music at top volumes, in fact, became a recognized culture dividing line, marking vials under our control. One night in Da Nang, for instance, 2 white army majors coming back from drinking at the officer club heard loud soul music coming from a black barracks. They barged in and ordered the offending music turned off, and after the brothers refused, the 2 majors yanked and plugged out of the player themselves. In the ensuing disagreement, somehow, the 2 clueless settler officers were M16'd out of this life. Private Alfred Brothers Slim Flint was later convicted and sentenced to 30 years. Fragging obnoxious officers, the trusty old grenade tossed under the tent, edged late at night, right under the sleeping officer's cot, became common enough that some white officers changed their tents every night in musical beds. One U.S. Army brigade in Nam experienced 45 fraggings and other assassination attempts on white officers, and even in 11 months, black soldiers were nowhere close to being pacifists or being anything. And even in 11 months, black soldiers were nowhere close to being pacifists or being anything but tough in defending themselves in firefights. But other than that, bare survival minimum, they sabotaged the U.S. war efforts at every turn, as many white GIs were doing too. Not that a clusteristic war planned by country club brass at the Pentagon needed much sabotage. In 1971, GIs, a long benign, celebrated the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday with a large march around the base headed by our nationalist black, green, and red liberation flag, with the GIs chanting, free Angela Davis, free Angela Davis, the famous Black Panther woman, fugitive from Los Angeles. It wasn't because the civilian anti-war sentiment along that President Nixon regime was forced to give up and pull U.S. ground forces out of Southeast Asia. Never again would the Pentagon make the mistake of having new African soldiers dominate the composition of U.S. combat units. The freedom movement of the 1960s grew in the prisons just as much as in college, churches, and housing projects. The prison poet Etheridge Knight describes the kind of change coming down, with some young prisoners who had organized a sit-down strike over racism that are reformatory then became transferred into a higher security indigenous state prison. Indiana State Prison. Here's what they wrote. The morning of August 5th, 1968 began like all other mornings in prison. Dismantling a thick fog rising out of nearby Lake Michigan during the night had crept over the walls and permeated the prison, and we had settled into our usual routine when the news of the arrival of some young brothers from downstate rumbled through the prison like an earthquake, shaking us out of our lethargy. Within minutes, the crowd of onlookers lined the streets leading to the admission to the admission building. Through the back gates in the south wall, the young ones came, chained in malice like a coffee of slaves. A coffee of slaves. They hobbled along in their leg irons. They wore their hair long, flaring out from their heads. The tikis, Tikis, and others charms hung around their necks. And as the line hobbled along, the young men would raise their hand, emaciated hands, in the Black Power sign, as they smiled or shouted to some recognized onlookers. 1 second. Oh, we're good. Just making sure. Hello. At noon, the mess hall buzzed with conversations about new arrivals. And despite the fears of anxieties expressed by some of the older black convicts in regards to the militant posture of the young black people, there was a general air of pride among the black population, and an almost unperceivable lifting of the shoulders in the months to come. The beneficial effects of the young black people on the older ones was to be proved. Knifing and fistfighting among brothers decreased. The boxing program, once a main sports interest, went out of existence. Interest in things black increased to such a degree that a history book such as Leron Bennett's Before the Mayflower was worth 10 cartons of cigarettes, prison currency, and even though the guards tried to break them up, gangs were formed to protect the more timid young black people from some of the old convicts who wanted to make girls out of them, quote unquote. Okay. Such politics awakening were taking place in most prisons, rather on the large or small scale. In 1970, manifesto of striking prisoners at famous Folsom Prison in California was typical in denouncing, quote, the fascist concentration camps of modern America, end quote. In September 1971, the spreading prison struggle crashed right into a nightly television news when part of New York's maximum security Attica state prison was finally taken over by primarily black uprising. Earlier there, back in that July of 1971, New York State Prison Commissioner Russell Oswald had received a detailed signed petition from 5 prisoner representatives of the Attica Liberation faction, demanding an end of brutal dehumanization. Condition Commissioner Oswald, worried about the threat of revolt, corresponded with the prisoners, but refused in the end to do anything. He vaguely promised future reforms in a taped loudspeaker broadcast to the entire prison. This is good. We just read about the Attica revolt and now we're in this. Then on September 21st, 1971, George Jackson and 2 others, new African prisoners, were killed, along with 3 guards, in the puzzling gunfight outside California's maximum prison, San Quentin Prison. Prison authorities said that Jackson had attempted to escape using a large 9mm automatic pistol, somehow smuggled in by his lawyer, later acquitted of the charges. The government said that this pew-pew was then carried back out of the visiting area through the physical search on top of Jackson's head, hiding under a wig. This was a scenario thought ludicrously implorable by black prisoners to whom George Jackson was a hero. If you tried balancing a large military pistol on your head and then put an afro wig on top of that, you'll immediately see what they meant. Kept inside New York, California prison for life since he was 15 of age was for unsuccessfully trying to rob a grocery store. Jackson's radical understanding of America had helped make his autobiography a best-selling book around the world, and exposed the bitter life struggle of black underclass. In a way, even Malcolm's earlier generations autobiography hadn't. Across the country, there were demonstrations and meetings among the prisoners. The last day, August 22nd, back in New York at Attica, 800 prisoners filed into a mess hall at breakfast and sat silently, each wearing some black article of clothing, if only a black shoelace tied around one arm, in a defended memorial of their fallen comrades and brothers. When, on September 9th, 1971, a spontaneous tussle at Attica between a prisoner hidden from punishment and a few guards chasing him touched off an exploding running battle for control over first common rooms and then entire buildings, the prisoners emerged, controlling part of Attica. They also held some 50 guards hostage. The prison then was 54% black, 9% Puerto Rican, with all the guards being white settlers, except for one Puerto Rican token. In their 5 demands addressed not to the Commissioner Oswald, but to the people of America, the Attica rebels stated, "We are men. We are not beasts. We do not intend to be beaten or driven as such." It was a declaration that made history. On September 13th, after 5 days of a heavily armed siege, the surrounding state troopers and guards started massed gunfire into the yard and retook the prison at the order of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, but only after 32 prisoners and 11 guard hostages had been shot down and unalived by the force of law and order. They fired thousands of rounds of rifles, handguns, and shotguns, fired into men defending for the most part only by public opinion. Many of the dead could have been saved, but were denied blood transfusions and any medical care at all for hours by the victors. Severely wounded just bled out, lying there on the ground. One doctor who later was admitted to the yard remember being told by the guards, "Why do it? They're not people, they're animals," quote unquote. That's disgusting. The prison movement, which except for those rare moments of spontaneous breakthrough, was usually a very small minority of the most aware and self-disciplined prisoners, nevertheless took on great culture and political significance in the 1960s and 70s. It brought into the light of day a standard of which human rights are not conditional, except respect of human living conditions and freedom from fear are basic rights, even for the damned. It exposed the enduring legality of being New African and the contradictions between the neo-colonial surface equality of America and the real separate societies of oppressors and oppressed. While there have always been an occasional prison riots, what was different with the prison movement was its politically conscious dimensions of being on stream in the greater river of the liberation struggle. When Malcolm X said that prisons is the black man's universities, he meant it in a much larger way than simply studying books in cells. Yaki, as a person was forged and hammered and honed down by lifelong imprisonment, which was the unforgiving workshop in which he made his character and abilities. It was where as an adult he spent 33 years, almost his entire adult life, just to give the reader some mental pictures. Yaki was a man of average height, slim, but not slender, wiry. The afro he had when young became short, close-cut hair with gray in it when he was older. For a long time you might see him as his favorite worn light gray sweatshirt and a pair of plain cotton pants, or a blue short work shirt, or other plain button-down shirts with long sleeves. Prison isn't Saks Fifth Avenue, and living his life without. Oh my gosh! Western consumerism became normally and then conspicuous political choice for him. Another. I gotta appeal again, everybody. You gotta appeal again. What did I do? Oh my gosh. Oh, not there. My God, where did my shit go? No. There we go. Back on it. Sorry, everybody. Even after finally getting out, Yaki never did concede that meals should be a treat for anything special. It's just fuel to me, he'd always say, looking irritated. Like a number of other state prisoners who had some commissary, Yaki avoided the regular mess hall food. The food in here will kill you, he'd say quite seriously. Instead, he picked at the overcooked institutional vegetables, but mostly relied on high protein food like packaged tuna fish and peanut butter bought from commissary and eaten in his cell. Self-discipline is very in every area of life became his style. But when Yaki had gotten out of juvenile prison and started a new life at age 21, he joined an intense time of nationalist activity. He had been into poetry and managed to become a salesman for a cultural nationalist publisher. He tried to learn from talking to more accomplished writers who were around then, such as the famous poet Gwendolyn Brooks. In his plans, Yaki had looked forward to making the rounds of church, schools, and social clubs, talking about the Yaki had looked forward to making the rounds of church, schools, and social clubs, talking about the new ideas of liberation and tipping people to the latest young author. To his surprise, instead, he was ordered to concentrate on visits to white bookstores and getting them to place orders, forgetting about selling to ordinary people. Yaki said that it was his first lessons about black capitalism on his own time. In 1969, Yaki started a small revolutionary nationalist magazine called The Juggernauts. In the first issue, Yaki warned others who were taking the revolutionary path, quote, "Our job is to bring about change. It is not to face reality, but to change it. And this cannot be done by attending meetings once or twice a week, reading a few books or writing a few poems, praying or waiting to see what someone else is going to do. We must work every day of the year, 24 hours a day, and every day must be a day of preparation and rehearsal. We must keep the goals always in mind." In a rough poem written in Malcolm's memory, back then, young Yaki said that he remembered, quote, my despair, my worthlessness as a man-child lost inside Babylon's steel cages. But after being healed by Malcolm X's words, it's faded. During those brief 3 years, outside in the burning 1960s, Yaqui was being drawn into primitive rebellion. Like millions of other people around the world, primitive rebellion is the most basic and preliminary stage of an armed struggle. Euro-capitalist slants the word primitive to disrespect others, misusing it to imply backward or ignorant or arrogant. Ignorant. In reality, primitive simply refers to the earliest stage of things, the starting, as the prehistoric cave paintings of, I can't say that, art, which are nevertheless among the world's greatest art treasures. The 1950s Kenyan Land and Freedom Army, which the West knows under the British label Mau Mau, is one of the best examples of this primitive rebellion, seeing that there were millions of Africans and only tens of thousands of British settlers in Kenya, whose earlier freedom fighters thought that each one kill one strategy would easily work. What time is it? We're gonna finish up here. Since this is only the let me see here. Okay. If the Kikuyu warrior would only go out and kill at least one nearby white settler, then the whole colonial occupation would collapse from the losses and shock and chaos. Unfortunately, revolutionary armed struggles against the militarized capitalism turned out to be much more complex and difficult than that. Just jumping out and unaliving white people may seem like an understandable angry fantasy, but not something that you'd want to throw your life away doing, then or now. But for Yaqui and those Bloods stepping into that unknown, it signified something important: the awareness that an undeclared state of war exists. Whatever anyone personally wanted, once H. Rap Brown was stopped by the journalist as he was boarding an airliner and asked what the civil rights struggle in the South had been like. Quote, "It was a war, man," he answered. "It was a war. It wasn't just a world echelon assassination of Malcolm X and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., or the daily harassment and arrest of local leaders and organizers. Many new African people were disappeared by the Klan and police in the South. In one early 1960s case, a 10-year-old boy was disappeared in Mississippi after daring to wear a voter registration t-shirt. It was also a gigantic urban uprising from 1962 on, in which millions of people took over the streets and entire neighborhoods threw rocks and bottles at police and firemen, sniped with rifles, smashed open stores and redistributions of goods, and torched buildings and entire blocks. In reply, the occupying police and National Guard everywhere made new African neighborhoods into free firing zones as though it were Vietnam. In Washington, D.C., National Urban League Assistant Director Horace Morrison was about to drive off from a family visit, only to witness police drive up and just shoot down both his younger brother and his 73-year-old father, standing at their door. In Detroit, at night during the curfew, a young man lit a match from his cigarette near his living room window. A settler National Guardsman standing at his Jeep mounted a .50 cal a 50 caliber machine gun, swung around and hosed the apartment with its deadly heavy fire, instantly unaliving a young girl and tearing off the arm of her aunt. It was a war, man. It was a war. I'm going to stop there. We're going to stop there. Stopping on my page 16, introduction. We're going to stop there. We're gonna stop there. Stop there. All right. A little bit of the introduction. Finishing the other book up. The other book is amazing. This book kind of goes into the Attica Revolt. So yeah, talked about how prisons are basically fuels for exploring how to mind control people, how to keep them subjugated, and how to and how they use experimentations in prisons in order to engage with the because they made a thing that I really like. Not that I liked it, but like it's a good point. Whenever they utilize technology-wise, they will utilize on its citizens. If they utilize it in prisons, they're going to utilize it on the citizens easily. Yeah, so easily. Does anybody want to come up and talk or say anything? If not, that's fine too. I get it. It's fine. But I'll leave it open for people. I know you can't come up, Joe. I get it. But we're going to continue this book. And I want to get into like Black Reconstruction, I think. We'll see how I feel after this. I was meant to go into Black Reconstruction now, but because they kept mentioning Fanon and the Attica Revolt, it seems like it's very good to go into this book now. Because I was going to read this book eventually anyways. So I hope I made the right choice. It sounds like it did. One person said yes, so that's good. So, but everybody start to enjoy this at first. How's my reading doing? Is my reading okay? Was I clear? So far. All right, cool. No worries. You don't have to. I just ask. Sweet. All right then. Well, I'll go ahead and close it and we'll start this book. We'll get further and deep into this book. I don't know if I'm going to bring, what do you call it? I don't know if I'm going to use the Wretched of the Earth because I have to figure out, because I remember we read this and it was almost like we read it to understand, but I don't know how to engage. So I'm going to have to figure it out. Let me get after the introduction, of course. Long introduction, Jesus. It's okay. Trying to look at, okay, here we go. The first chapter is going to be part 1. It says Wars of the Cities. And it doesn't look like there's a lot of his notes on here. So I'm looking, because I know there's parts where he shows his notes, what notes he took. Okay, so we'll figure it out. We'll take it case by case. All right, everybody. Well, enjoy. I might do a